Namaste. Good afternoon. I remember always being a voracious reader. I read everything that I could get my hands on. And just recently, having a conversation with my better half, we talked about George Orwell's 1984. And I realized that all the reading, my reading of the classics, be that whatever they were, was before the age of 14, because I realized, gee, it's been 60 years since I picked up. She quoted something out of George Orwell, and I thought, it's 60 years since I picked up the book. And that's the case for most of the canons. I delved into a little bit of never interested too much in the Greek mythology but enough to get a verse in Socrates and Plato and all the earmarks of historical, disciplined, academic exposure. I was exposed to them, but it was almost all pre-14. And of course, then after that, with the exception of being what I needed to read basically for school, on through the university. But I always stuck to my genre of science fiction. To this day, every night I read it on a Kindle, not a Kindle, but on my iPad mini, I read science fiction. And I've never really stopped. But as far as the miscellaneous reading that I do, that's it. So I started thinking about, first of all, I always categorize myself as a free thinker. Free to think whatever was catching my fancy. A free thinker. But definitely not a disciplined thinker in the traditional sense of rigorous academic application and achievement. Free thinker. And what happened about at age 14, I wondered, did it stop? Well, that's when I realized that I read the autobiography of yoga by Paramahamsa Yogananda. One of the, I understand now, probably the second Hindu, even though they claimed it to be the first, but Vivekananda with the Advaita Vedanta had been here 20 years earlier, 30 years earlier. Anyway, he was one of the first monks that came and lived in America, the first probably. Hindu monk, Hindu Swami, that came and lived in America. And I read that book like it was a gospel. I mean, they absorbed, and it's fanciful and talks about all kinds of amazing occurrences that happened in his life. Some things would almost be magical for most Western minds. But as a free thinker, I had no problem. And the truth of the matter was that the veracity wasn't what really, because I loved the fantasy, the freedom of being exposed. And this reading, the only thing that I absorbed really, other than absorbing what was necessary academically to continue, because it seemed like the best venue for me, the one that maybe I had the best chance of preparing a career for, academia. But anyway, my serious reading was all confined to spiritual books. I never read anything. The Western Theosophy, Annie Besant, Madame Blavatsky, the Course in Miracles, the Ascended Masters. So I was exposed to, but I started probably my first year in university, 18, 19, I got exposed to Eastern philosophy and the Vedantas and the Upanishads, and an all-time favorite, the Bhagavad Gita, and wasn't somewhere along the studies, the I Ching became something of interest, and Tao Te Ching was Taoism caught my fancy quite early. So those are the books that I have on hand. I still have within hand's reach. Well, a little longer than hand's reach because I can't show you right now. I have a copy of the Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu. And I used to just methodically open it to a page, and it would always be relevant. That's the beauty of that book for me. In my experience, it was its relevancy. No matter when I just randomly opened it, whatever lesson, whatever verse was there. But I had one that's beautifully illustrated, which I enjoyed too. And it's a picture book, coffee table book, good size, hardback. And I have very, very few hardbacks in my possession after moving so much. And books are troublesome. On my Kindle, on my iPad, I'm sorry, Apple, on my iPad I have more books than I could carry on that, stored on that. But anyway, free thinker. And then I got into, so I stuck with Hinduism for many years and expanded into Taoism, but basically I was interested in the lives of the saints, the Indian saints, Eastern philosophy, and read a lot of, read what I could find about Indian sages, Indian masters, and continuing with my interest in Western metaphysics. Christmas Humphreys, the early British Buddhists, came to walk on is still one of my favorite. But here we're talking about free thinking. This is kind of associative thinking, that my mind was very pliable. It would quickly morph. My thoughts were continually expanding or contracting depending on breathing in or breathing out. And I was able to just absorb the things of my interest in that science fiction, but I never really absorbed. Wasn't interested in the science. Wasn't interested in the details. I was interested in the sociology, the relationship of people has been the constant. People and how they relate and how they organize and how they express themselves as a group versus an individual, and seeing the necessity being very much an individualist and staying away from groupthink and trying to blaze my own trail, more or less. But then the study of Rinzai Zen, and I read a few of the Zen masters, but reading, I was given a koan, which is kind of a puzzle, a Zen puzzle, that's not answerable through the rationality, through the rational or logistical thinking of the mind, which suited me because my mind, again, didn't lend itself to even rationality, because I could entertain all kinds of disparate information. And yesterday I did the video on cognitive dissonance and how important that was but I want to go back to my Zen training, and was more involved in the process of sitting and then I would spend a whole lot of time trying to learn to discipline the mind through a series of quieting, with the ultimate goal of stilling or even stopping the mind until I just gave up I surrendered to my inability after 33 years. I can't do this. And why would I want to dismantle my mind? I haven't got many tools in my toolbox, but here's one that I got. It's counterintuitive. But that had to do more with my misunderstanding of my goal in Zen was clarity. That was clarity of thinking, having been a free thinker, a fuzzy thinker, maybe even a lazy thinker at times. Compared to the rigorous discipline of other people that reading the textbook for 24 hours and completely committing to memory like they do in Taiwan, the whole chapter. Anyway, none of that wasn't my forte. My mind just rebelled that memorization, but it had a pretty good retention rate if I was deemed useful. So this free thinking. But then, interestingly enough, after 33 years, I spent probably the next 4 years, I was so let's say 66, 33 to 66 is usually my Zen period. And from 66 to 70 or really 64, there was some overlap because I stayed with Chan, which is Chinese, and my teacher, my only teacher was to have in this lifetime was a Chan, from the Chan lineage. And this is the silent transmission of very little talking, lots of meditation. And it all suited me, the silent transmission, because I was able to be aware and get the frequencies of non-verbalized communication. But probably, I guess around the age of 70, all of a sudden, my mind from free thinking, a little bit fuzzy, undisciplined, basically doing what I wanted to do and thinking about what I wanted to think about, became laser beam, laser sharp on the process. Jnana yoga is what I learned to call it after I practiced it, after I was finished with it. Jnana yoga, the yogic tool of the mind. I'm going to go over today because I want to, but laser and the storing and the accumulation of information, accumulate more information with the 70-year-old mind than I ever did with the 16-year-old mind. I learned to evaluate, rigorous evaluation, mulling over, chewing my cud, thinking things through, in the search, in the refining information to knowledge, and to further expose through further rigorous thinking, glean the wisdom from the knowledge. And then came the process of sorting it. So I defined it, sort it, file it, and eventually store it. So it's ironic that my mind never had used my mind this way till the age of 70. And I got to the point where I said to you honestly that during the awakening experience, I was exposed to the Library of Alexandria, and I knew right then, for that brief period of time, however long it was, because the spatial time continuum stopped, but able to get this bookshelves of just pouring to me, and the books falling out and absorbing everything. And at one point I realized that I not only knew everything that could be known, I knew everything that had been known. There was no lost information. It was available. And on top of that, I knew what will be known. Known in the past, and known in the future, all at the same time. And I had access. It was all within my brain at one time, at one moment, at one concept. Amazingly so. And the result was was that I learned that it was available when I needed it. I knew what I needed to know when I needed to know it.